I'm interested here as well because obviously you work at a Jewish publication, and so you deal with anti-Semitism a lot in your coverage, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show. You're somebody who has that specific threat, or at least a specific reason to feel fear for your life at this moment in time right now, right? And most people don't have something like that. They don't have a restraining order against an ex-partner or whatever. But there are a lot of general threats to people's safety that exist in the public sphere, right?
Right.
And perhaps even elevated risks for members of minority groups, like Jewish people. And so, I'm interested in your take on just that requirement in general. And I know that, for instance, Washington, D.C., they had a total ban on concealed carry. Then that got struck down, and they implemented a New York, Maryland, California style may issue law for a while. And it really functioned in practice more like some California counties where it's may issue, but they'll give you a permit if you have these certain different documents, like a restraining order, for instance. And then that of course got struck down because they would still deny anyone who had just a general desire for self-defense, or who, if they lived in a neighborhood with a high crime rate, or they were, a member of a minority group that suffers hate crimes, like Asian people or Jewish people or Black Americans and so forth. But I don't know, where do you come down on that distinction? Are you still wanting to see, it's really only people who have a very specific threat that has documented police records behind it, or a restraining order behind it, should be able to get these permits or not?
So I was very struck yesterday, actually. We at The Forward have been covering the situation in Highland Park really intensely because it's a heavily Jewish community. Obviously, there was a devastating shooting over the weekend. And my colleague spoke to a local synagogue in the area that was next door to where the shooter grew up. And the head of security mentioned actually that the alleged shooter had kind of cased out the synagogue and had been inside of the synagogue. And the security official also mentioned that there were individuals in the congregation who were armed and who carried openly. And, it's been a huge debate within the Jewish community over the past several years, with anti-Semitism really on the rise. I'm sure for other minority communities as well. There's, culturally, most Jewish Americans are pretty liberal. And there's a big reluctance to, guns are not really a part of Jewish American culture for most of us. And a lot of people really started to take seriously. I know my synagogue had trainings on personal safety, and there's been a ton of investment in security. And a lot of people are feeling much more vulnerable and, asking themselves whether or not carrying is something that they should be doing. I really think that everyone should have the opportunity to safely defend themselves. And that's going to look different in different parts of the country. I personally would be uncomfortable with people in New York City who, aren't well trained on how to use a handgun, trying to go Rambo on defending their turf. But, the reality is there were over 50 people shot in New York City over the 4th of July weekend. And we have very tight gun laws here, but there's a ton of guns here. And I would much rather have a slightly larger percentage of the population really thinking about personal safety and security and, looking into how to properly carry a firearm than leaving it to, just people with the worst of intentions being the ones armed.